We wanted to take a moment to note the passing of Don Cornelius, the creator of Soul Train. He died today in Los Angeles at 75, an apparent suicide.
There are television moments that live forever in the public memory, moments so powerful, so electric, that they become part of the cultural fabric of a nation. And then there are moments that producers desperately wish they could erase. Moments buried in editing rooms, locked away in archives, never meant to see the light of day. Soul Train, the legendary Saturday morning institution that brought black music, culture, and style into millions of American living rooms, had both kinds of moments. But one particular incident stands apart from everything else in the show's 35-year history. It was chaotic. It was shocking. And the people in charge wanted it gone, permanently. To understand why that moment mattered so deeply, and why its suppression sent ripples through the entire production, you first have to understand what Soul Train meant to America. Not just as a television program but as a cultural lifeline. When Soul Train premiered in 1970 on Chicago's WCIU, it arrived at a moment when black Americans were largely invisible on mainstream television, or worse, reduced to stereotypes and sideline roles. Don Cornelius, a radio DJ and event host from Chicago's South Side, had spent years running dance parties at local high schools, calling them the Soul Train. He rode the city's trains from neighborhood to neighborhood, carrying music with him like a traveling preacher carries scripture. He believed, with absolute conviction, that black talent deserved a national stage. What he built proved him right beyond anything he could have imagined. By 1971, Soul Train had gone national. Sponsored initially by Johnson Products, the makers of Afro Sheen, the show syndicated across the country city by city until all 25 target markets were airing it within the first season alone. The formula was deceptively simple. Live music performances, a charismatic host, and a dance floor filled with young people moving in ways that television had never shown before. But what it produced was nothing short of revolutionary. Soul Train didn't just show black culture. It celebrated it, amplified it, and exported it into the living rooms of every kind of American family. The dancers were the heartbeat of the show. These weren't trained professionals pulled from performing arts schools. They were neighborhood kids, teenagers from rec centers and block parties who showed up with their own clothes, their own moves, and their own spirit. When the Jackson 5 performed the robot dance in 1973, they had actually learned the move by watching the Soul Train dancers. That is how influential these young people were. They were setting the trends, not following them. Don Cornelius himself was the anchor of it all. Calm, deep-voiced, and immaculately dressed, he brought an authority to the show that made it feel important. He wasn't just introducing acts, he was presiding over a cultural institution. His sign-off line, "We wish you love, peace, and soul," became one of the most recognizable phrases in American broadcast history. When Cornelius told James Brown, "You're still the baddest out here," and Brown laughed and played along, that was the kind of television magic that simply could not be manufactured. It happened because the environment Cornelius created was genuine. But behind that polished surface, Soul Train operated under enormous pressure, and Don Cornelius was the primary source of it. He was a perfectionist in the truest sense of the word. He demanded that performers lip-sync their songs correctly, and if they didn't, he made them do it again. He controlled every visual element of the broadcast. He had strong opinions about what kind of dancing was acceptable on his stage and what crossed a line into territory he considered inappropriate. His standards were exacting and he enforced them personally. This created an atmosphere that was exciting for viewers but often tense for the people inside the production. Cornelius was not an easy man to work with, and several people who passed through Soul Train's doors have spoken about that tension over the years. Dancer and actress Rosie Perez, who got her start on the show's dance floor before becoming a major Hollywood star, has spoken candidly about a confrontation she had with Cornelius when he pushed her to perform in a way she found uncomfortable. When she refused, the situation escalated. She has described grabbing the only thing within reach, a piece of Kentucky Fried Chicken, which was the actual payment dancers received for appearing on the show, and throwing it at him. The image of Rosie Perez hurling a chicken wing at Don Cornelius in the middle of a Soul Train production is both absurd and deeply revealing. It tells you everything about the tension that existed just beneath the show's gleaming exterior. The fact that dancers were compensated with fast food rather than actual wages is itself a story worth pausing on. The show made Don Cornelius wealthy and powerful. It gave major artists a national platform and launched careers that went on for decades. But the young people on that dance floor, the ones whose energy and creativity were, in many ways, the actual product being sold to viewers, were handed a meal and sent home. Some dancers have said publicly that they felt exploited. One was quoted saying that the show's name was built off the sweat of their backs. Others who invented popular dance styles that spread nationally through Soul Train's broadcast claimed they never received any credit or compensation for their contributions. All of that tension, all of those contradictions, eventually had to surface somewhere. And they did, in a moment that stopped production cold and sent the show's producers into a controlled panic about what to do next. The details of exactly what occurred have never been fully confirmed on the record, which is precisely the point. Soul Train's producers were extraordinarily careful about what footage reached the public. Don Cornelius exercised tight control over the show's archive. He actively fought against fans uploading clips to YouTube and pursued legal action against anyone distributing old episodes without authorization. This wasn't just about copyright protection, it was about controlling the narrative. Soul Train's image was everything, and Cornelius guarded it fiercely. What is known is that on at least one occasion, something happened on that stage that was so far outside the boundaries of what the show projected to the world that the footage was pulled entirely. It never aired. Producers gathered afterward and made a collective decision that what had been captured on camera could not be broadcast. Some accounts suggest it involved a confrontation between performers and production staff. Others point to an incident on the dance floor that escalated well beyond what anyone anticipated. The show's controlled environment, which normally kept everything running smoothly, had broken down and the cameras caught all of it. For a show that projected joy, unity, and celebration every single week, the existence of that footage was a direct threat to everything it stood for. If viewers saw what had actually happened that day, the carefully constructed image of Soul Train as a harmonious, joyful space would be permanently complicated. So the decision was made to hide it. The episode was reworked or replaced. The incident was never publicly acknowledged. And for years it stayed buried. The effort to suppress that scene reveals something important about how Soul Train actually functioned as a business and as a cultural product. Don Cornelius was not simply a host or even just an executive producer. He was a brand manager, perhaps the first black television figure to operate with that kind of strategic awareness. He understood that Soul Train's power came from its image, an image of black excellence, style, and joy that was aspirational and unifying. Any crack in that image was a threat to the entire enterprise. This is why the dancer controversies, the behind-the-scenes tensions, and the incidents that never made it to air were all handled the same way, quietly, internally, and out of public view. Cornelius had built something precious, and he protected it the way any founder protects their creation, sometimes to an extreme that caused real harm to the people working within it. The irony is that this protectiveness ultimately contributed to the show's decline. As hip-hop emerged in the 1980s and reshaped black music culture entirely, Cornelius struggled to embrace it. He admitted publicly that he didn't connect with the genre. He was reportedly unsettled by groups like Public Enemy. He added hip-hop acts to the lineup because the ratings demanded it, not because he believed in them the way he had believed in soul and R&B. That disconnect was visible on screen and audiences felt it. By the time Cornelius stepped down as host in 1993, Soul Train had already begun its slow fade. The show continued for another 13 years under a rotating cast of hosts, Mistro Clark, Shamar Moore, Dorian Gregory, but none of them carried the weight that Cornelius had. The show had been built around one man's personality and vision, and without him at the center of it, the structure gradually weakened. The ratings told the story clearly. By the mid-2000s, viewership had dropped below the threshold that made the show viable for major networks. Tribune Entertainment, which had distributed the show for years, shut down in 2007. Cornelius attempted to save Soul Train through a deal with Trifecta Entertainment and Media, but the momentum was gone. After 35 seasons, the show produced its final new episode in 2006. What followed was reruns, archival packages, and eventually a sale of the entire brand to outside investors. Don Cornelius died in February 2012 at 75, from a self-inflicted gunshot wound at his home in Los Angeles. The people closest to him said they had not seen it coming. His longtime business partner Clarence Avant had met with him just a week before and described him as seemingly fine. The man who had built one of American television's most enduring institutions spent his final years largely removed from the spotlight, dealing with a painful divorce and personal struggles he largely kept private, consistent, even in his darkest chapter, with the controlled image he had maintained throughout his entire career. Soul Train's legacy is both enormous and complicated, which is perhaps the most honest thing that can be said about any institution that shaped a generation. The joy it broadcast was real. The careers it launched were real. The cultural impact, on music, on fashion, on the very way Black Americans saw themselves represented on screen, was genuinely transformative. But so were the grievances of the people it left behind. The dancers who were never paid. The talent that was exploited. The scenes that were buried. The tensions that were managed rather than addressed. What the producers tried to hide was never just one scene. It was the full, complicated truth of what it costs to build something extraordinary, and what sometimes gets sacrificed in the process of making it look effortless. Soul Train always ended the same way. Don Cornelius, calm and composed, looking directly into the camera, and delivering those final words with absolute certainty. "We wish you love, peace, and soul." He meant it. But the story behind those words was always more complicated than the words themselves. And now, finally, that story deserves to be told in full.